This is a continuation of the Flexbox CSS discussion that we began in the previous tutorial. We left the last tutorial by looking at how we could initiate a Flexbox layout by setting the CSS display property of a HTML element and specifying the desired direction of the flex elements, whether they be horizontal rows by default or setting them manually as vertical columns. In this tutorial, we'll be looking at additional Flexbox settings available to us. I'm first going to add some H2 elements to label the two previous Flexbox examples that we created. I'll just create a set of H2 tags and I'll label this as flex row. This was a flex container set to row by default, and I'll add another H2 element, flex column, that we set manually. In this tutorial, we will be nesting two instances of a Flexbox within another instance of a Flexbox. This will assist us in laying out our web pages to the desired specifications. I'll first begin by creating our main Flexbox, which will nest the two we will create in a moment. I'll just create a div. I'll set a class name and call this flex main container. I'll copy the class name and reference it in our styles.css file. I'll quickly set a height of 50 pixels, a background color of Dodger blue, and I'll also create another break in between our previously created flex column container and our new flex main container. We also have to specify that we want our flex main container to be of the type display flex in order to make it a flex container. Here I want to create two additional flex containers. So we'll create another div element. I'll give this a class name of flex nested container. I'll copy this and paste another one down here. We'll reference all of our elements with the class name of flex nested container. Full stop to indicate a class and then the class name. And I'll add a quick height. .30 pixels and a background color of white. Also set a width of 50 pixels and a margin of 20 pixels. I'll delete the height within our flex main container And now we have two divs displaying in a row within our Flex main container. Now our Flex nested containers aren't yet of the type Flex because we haven't specified it within our Flex nested container div. We will do that in a moment. I'm just going to go up to our Flex column instance of a Flex container, select all the nested divs with the class name of Flex container underscore underscore div, and just copy that. And then within our nested divs, I'm going to paste those additional divs within each of them and save. I'll also delete the height and the width within our CSS for the Flex nested container. Save that, refresh, and that looks a little better. So what we have happening here is we have our Flex main container, which is defined as a display of Flex, and within it we have our two divs nested, which we will also be defining as Flex in a moment. They currently aren't defined, but within each of our Flex nested container class elements, we have 3 divs. In our Flex nested container, I want to change the background color to, we'll say green, and that gives a little more clarification of our margin. And now I want to set our Flex nested containers to the display type of Flex also. Save this. Now you'll notice that these are currently in block, but if we refresh, now that our Flex nested containers are display Flex, we now have the content of them displayed in rows. They're displayed in rows by default. What I would like is I'd like for our first nested Flex container to run as a column, similarly to our Flex column example. Quickly, I'll add another H2 element. And I'm also going to define an ID name for our first nested Flex div. ID equals, I'll copy this name and then add underscore underscore 1 to make it a reference to only this div rather than this div also. To target a ID, we use the £, and then the name of the ID. So this is defined as a Flex container, as we are using this class name here, but we can also set the Flex direction of column. The problem that we are going to run into here is it's going to affect both of these as they have the same class name, and we are assigning the CSS style to that particular class name. Make sure both of these pages are saved, refresh, and they are both in columns, but we only want this one in a column and this one in its default row. So I'll copy that, I'll paste it within our ID of flex nested container _ one, which will only target this div. Save, refresh, and now we have a column displayed here as defined here and a row defined here by default. I'm going to assign an ID to our second nested flex container, and I'll call this 2. Again, we'll specify ID flex nested container 2, and I'll give this a height of 100% and save. Also have to save the flexpage.html. And our second flex container will only take up as much height as required to display the contents within. From here, we're going to look at some Flexbox properties that we can assign to a Flexbox in order to have it behave in the manner that we want it to. Back in our code, I'm going to create another Flexbox. First, I'll break up the nested Flexbox and our new one with a break. I'll call this section Flex Test. I'll define a div that we will use as a flex container in a moment. Assign it a class name. I'll call this Flex Test Container. In our styles.css, we'll reference it. And give it the display type of flex. Save both of the files. I'll just copy these divs from our nested flex demonstration and paste them in. And then I'll change the class names to flex test div. I'll also copy one more div and call this 4. We'll reference all the flex test divs. I'll just copy the properties we used. So we've got a margin of 10, padding 20, font size 30, and background color of white. I've made a slight typo there. Also set the color of our new flex container to Dodger Blue. Quickly save this, save the HTML. Now we have a simple flex box displaying our nested divs. in a row. I'm also going to assign each of these an ID. I'll call the first one flex test underscore underscore div underscore underscore 1. Copy that. 2. And I'll target each one of the IDs within our CSS. I'll also change the content of some of our divs slightly. I'm going to type 2 all in one long string. For the third div, I'll create a break. I'll leave the fourth one. I'll save both of these files, refresh. And this has just given us a bit of a difference within our divs. The long string is pushing this div further apart, and this div is pushing downwards, which is affecting all of our other divs as well. I'll set the width of 50 pixels for our fourth div and the height of 50 pixels. I'll actually change this to 200 pixels. A few CSS properties available to us when we are using Flex containers include Flex Direction, which we've already looked at, but if we want to set our Flex container as a column, we simply specify column. And now we have our divs displaying in a column. We can reverse the column. Which will display the last, first, and so on, working backwards. We can explicitly specify that we want our Flexbox in a row. And we can also reverse the row. Which will also push it up to the right. I'll just explicitly state that we want it as a row. We can use the justify content property. We'll set this to center. We can specify justify content flex start to start it at the beginning of the flex container. And we can also specify flex end. If we want our divs spread out across the entirety of our flex container, we can use space around, which will divide them up equally but have the unused space focused around each div. And if we want all divs within the container pushed to both sides, we can specify space between. And now the space will be filled within between our divs. I'll remove the justify content property for now, save, refresh, and I'm going to copy all 4 divs and paste them twice below each other, just to give us additional divs for the next demonstration. As you can see, they are all displaying, but with our Flexbox they are overflowing it. This is when we can use the property of flex wrap, and we'll set this to wrap. Which will prevent it from overflowing within our flex container. We can also use wrap reverse. And we can also specify no wrap. Which will revert it to its default. I'll just leave this as wrap. So those are just a few Flexbox properties that we can use. There are others, but I plan on making a full tutorial in the future centered around Flexbox. As always, the documentation is available to you. It's simply a matter of practicing until the concepts become clear and you can utilize them to achieve what you want in regards to website layout. One more thing I will mention, if we resize our browser, you'll notice with the wrap, as our flex container grows smaller, the divs within it respond, and the flex container itself pushes the divs to accommodate the new sizing. This is how we achieve responsive web design for different types of devices that you might be viewing the site on, whether it's mobile, medium-sized sites, and all the way up to large monitors. Again, it's just a matter of practice, coming up with an idea for a layout and then trying to achieve that layout with Flexbox. I'll make a Flexbox tutorial in the future, but I'm going to leave this here for now. There are other methods of laying out a website, such as the grid layout module method, which we will look at in the future. But hopefully by now you've got a firm grasp on HTML in general and how you can begin to create the websites that you wish to create.